Good evening, everyone. My name is John Hughes. I'm honored to be the music director of the Chicago Master Singers. Welcome to another session of CMS University. I'm glad you're here. Now, tonight is a very special evening for a number of reasons. First of all, it's our last CMS University session for the season. Thank you very much for being here, and stay tuned until the very end. We have a few special surprises for you. The other reason that tonight is special is that we are talking about one of my very favorite pieces of all time, Handel's Messiah. And I know many of you know and love this piece too. Now, tonight's session is going to be kind of in two parts. During the first part, I'll talk about the history of the piece and how it's constructed and how it's been received throughout time. The second part will be an interview with soprano Michelle Areziga. Michelle has performed with CMS as a soprano soloist many, many times, and their most recent performance of Messiah in 2017. So it's going to be a wonderful evening, and throughout, I'll check the chat window on the right-hand side of the screen and take any questions you might have. If you are interested in joining that conversation, first, make sure you're logged into YouTube, and then second, when you do have a question for either myself or Michelle, please start it with 3 or 4 question marks in a row so we can quickly kind of distinguish between the normal conversation and questions for us. Now, let's get into our topic for tonight, Inside the Score of Handel's Messiah. This is the final one in the series of Inside the Score presentations. As I mentioned, this is one of my favorite pieces, and I was very fortunate to attend Augustana College in Rock Island, Illinois. And they have a wonderful tradition of performing Messiah, the complete Messiah, 3 performances a year with pro soloists coming in, including Michelle has sung at Augustana several times. And so I felt like coming out of college, not only did I know this piece so well, having sung 12 performances of it, but also got to hear really amazing soloists. I was also honored to be part of the 150th annual performance of Messiah at Augustana, and that was almost 20 years ago now. So this is a beloved piece, not only by myself, but of many, and for good reason. And we'll be exploring that tonight. So first, a little bit about Mr. Handel, the composer. He was born and raised in Halle, Germany, the son of a very kind of upper middle class family. And before he settled in London, he traveled throughout Germany, worked in Hamburg, and Italy. Now, if you think back to my presentation on the musical influence of the Lutheran Reformation, you'll remember that a lot of German composers from the time of Luther at the early 16th century through the Baroque and early classical period traveled to Italy. So here, Handel lived, 150 years after Luther's Reformation, but he was reaping that musical culture that Luther engendered. Now, because of his travels and his upbringing, two kind of styles merged in his music. So first, we have the German polyphony, the Baroque polyphony, and then the Italian sense of dramatic flair that came out of opera. And this is really important to remember about Handel because Handel loved opera more than any other kind of music. And it was really his passion. Now, we might not think of Handel today as an operatic composer, although his operas still are performed today. But it's the most important thing to remember is that this sense of drama and pacing and flow permeated all of Handel's works, including his oratorios like Messiah. So Messiah is one of 29 oratorios that Handel wrote in his lifetime. He was tremendously successful at writing these. And I think it's interesting to note that a lot of the times the way we view a piece like Messiah may not always be how Handel, or whichever composer, might have viewed it. So, for example, many people associate Messiah with Christmas time, although it was conceived of as an Easter piece, which makes sense, right? He's talking about the story of the Messiah, right? So it's interesting to note that. He composed it for the benefit, as kind of a benefit performance to aid local hospitals and charities in Dublin. And he himself conducted the premiere in April of 1742. So you'll see it premiered right around this time of year after Easter. The orchestration for Messiah is fairly small, which would have been typical for the Baroque period. You'll see it listed here. And at the 1742 premiere, which Handel conducted himself, he had a choir of 20 singers. Of those 20 singers, 4 were the soloists. So very small forces, and a similarly sized orchestra, not too big. This again is interesting to note because I think a lot of us view Messiah as being performed by the large choruses, not only CMS, but groups like the Tabernacle Choir in Salt Lake with 360 members, or the Handel Haydn Society in Boston that I talked about previously, or even the Augustana's Handel Oratorio Society of 200 people. But that isn't necessarily how Handel would have heard it at its premiere. Later in his life, the performances did get quite large of this piece. Now, in subsequent performances, Handel modified Messiah frequently. And again, this is one of those things, like the way we think about music might be anachronistic. So we often will say, if we're going to do a piece, we're going to do it cover to cover, which I'm all for. I believe in being really true to the score. But that isn't a concept that was familiar to a lot of Baroque composers. Handel himself, we can see from his subsequent performances of this piece, often transcribed the solos. Maybe one time he'd have the mezzo sing it, another time he'd have the soprano sing it. And he would transcribe the solos to fit the different voice parts. Transpose the solos instead of transcribe. To fit the different voice parts, he would omit movements, just do big cuts in his own pieces, and even excerpt them. So we see him taking a movement like the Hallelujah Chorus and putting on a program of other works. So he wasn't as wed to this idea that there's kind of one version of Messiah that's cover to cover and please do it exactly as written. That's much more of a Romantic era idea. And we've talked about that before, right? That kind of the composer is God, and you're there to fulfill his or her artistic ideals as the performer. That is not a concept that a Baroque composer like Handel or Bach would have been familiar with. So very famously, Messiah was composed in only 24 days, which is incredible, right? When you think about over 2 hours of music, to even physically write that much music is a feat in 24 days, let alone compose it, right? That's a very a monumental undertaking. Now, I do believe that a lot of this piece was divinely inspired. We have stories of Handel not eating, not sleeping during this period, and him kind of weeping while he was writing it and taking kind of divine dictation of the piece. So I believe that definitely is true. But Handel was also very pragmatic, and he did something that a lot of Baroque composers, including J.S. Bach, did, which was to repurpose existing pieces and put new words to them and rearrange them and make them a new piece for this Messiah. So we're going to listen to a soprano and alto duet in Italian that Handel wrote before Messiah, and I want you to tell me if you can recognize how it was repurposed for Messiah. I think it'll be fairly obvious to those of you who know the piece well. So, for unto us a child is born. Right now, obviously, he had to refit the text to it. He had to write the tenor and bass parts to maybe make some slight alterations to the orchestral parts, right? But it's amazing, and there's a number of these examples. I just picked one here, that he repurposed existing pieces. And sometimes if you're listening to WFMT, you'll hear something, and you're like, isn't that? And then you know it's Handel, at least. Okay, so let's talk about the libretto, the words of the piece. These come from Charles Jennings, who was a British aristocrat, very affluent person, patron of the arts, and close friend of Handel. He not only collaborated with Handel on 5 of the librettos for 5 of Handel's oratorios, but he, in his own right, is a very famous editor of Shakespearean plays. So Shakespearean scholars would be familiar with Jennings that way. Now, Messiah's libretto is unusual, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit, but it's unusual because it's not a new creation. Rather, it's a compilation of scripture, right? So Jennings didn't actually write anything. Rather, he compiled Bible passages to make a narrative, right? For these, he relied on 2 sources, the King James Version of the Bible and the Book of Common Prayer. And for these, he drew specific verses that he knew people would be familiar with. And it kind of signaled something, right? These weren't just random verses, right? These had deep overtones in terms of culture and religious thought at the time that we might not be as aware of today. Unfortunately, Jennings was not all that pleased with Messiah. I'll let you read this quote, but aside from the end, where he says, there are some passages far unworthy of Handel, but much more unworthy of the Messiah. So kind of a not so inadvert dig at Messiah, right? This is a very overt dig. He did not like this piece at first, thought it was not good. And some scholars have backed this up saying, Messiah is so well known, but there are other great Handelian oratorios that we should perform more too. So that's kind of an interesting thing to think about. Now, in terms of the structure of Messiah, there are 3 main parts. And if you've sung the piece, as many of you have, you'll be familiar with part the first, part the second, part the third, right? So the first part is all about the fulfillment of prophecy about Christ's coming, the Messiah coming, and his ministry. I think this is the reason that we often associate Messiah with Christmas, or probably better yet, with Advent, when we start with Comfort Ye, right? The prophecies from Isaiah talking about the coming of the Messiah. Then the second part is all about Christ's passion, his death, and his resurrection and ascension into heaven. And then the third part is kind of dealing with life on earth afterwards, right? And this, how do we live in this promise of salvation, right? So that's kind of like the macro level. On a more micro level, there's this book from 1743 called A Word Book that Jennings compiled. These are all just the texts of Messiah. Now, there are 2 copies of this that were discovered in the 1980s, and they really lend some really good insight into how Jennings thought about it. So instead of just having the 3 big overarching parts, Jennings said in this word book that there are actually 16 scenes for this. And I'm going to show you, I have a book here. Let me switch it to the doc cam here. So this book here is one of my favorite resources, the Helmut Rilling Messiah, Understanding and Performing Handel's Masterpiece. This is Helmut Rilling, the very famous German composer, works in Stuttgart and also the Oregon Bach Festival here. Tremendous scholar of all sorts of music, but particularly Baroque music, and famously conducts everything from memory. A 3-minute octavo or the B minor Mass, everything's memorized with him. So a real genius. And in this book, which I highly recommend, and every time I conduct this piece, I come back to this and use it for my own preparation. As in this book, as an appendix, he has transcribed this word book from 1743 by Jennings. And you'll notice here that he has, the part the first, right? And here's the end of part 1. And then within these, he identifies scenes. And for the whole piece, he identifies 16 of these scenes. And the general pattern of them is that there's a recitative, and then a song or aria, and then a chorus, right? So we have Comfort Ye, Every Valley, and then And the Glory of the Lord. And then it goes on to the next scene, etc. Now, sometimes, like this third scene, is a little different. So we have recitative, song, and chorus, because O thou that tellest begins with a solo. And then we have recitative, song, chorus. So it's not always exactly that same pattern, but that's the overarching pattern. I think this is interesting because it helps us, as a conductor, know how to pace the program, pace the performance, so that we're kind of keeping those intact. I think it's also interesting to, whenever you can break things down from these three large parts down into these smaller vignettes, that helps you just understand what's going on. The third thing is that it, again, demonstrates Handel's operatic interest, right? This is how he was approaching the music. So it's good to kind of know about this. And if you are going to cut something, as a lot of people do, maybe you don't cut an entire part of a scene. You'd rather cut the whole scene. Just a thought. So we're now going to take a listen to the first scene, which is Comfort Ye, Every Valley, and the Glory of the Lord. And the performance we're going to listen to is by Voces 8 in London a couple of years ago. And this is with them and their scholars program and a small orchestra of period instruments. I chose this for a couple of reasons. The first being, this is probably about the size of orchestra that Handel heard and had at his disposal for that 1742 premiere. So it'll give you a sense of what Handel would have been accustomed to. The second thing is that the way that Voces 8 paces this is very quick between the movements. And this, again, helps us understand how these scenes work of quickly moving between recitative, aria, chorus, because that's, again, part of that operatic tradition. So we're going to listen. This is a little under 9 minutes, but it goes very quickly because this is a really amazing performance. I hope you enjoy it.
crieth in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be exalted, shall be and the rough places plain. The crook is straight, the crook is straight, and the rough places plain. And the rough places plain. And every mountain and hill made low. The crooked straight, the crooked straight, the crooked straight, and the rough places plain, and the rough places plain, and the rough places plain. The crooked straight and the rough places
I'm glad so many of you are bopping along to that. I love it, and I agree the tempo's great and in one, and I love they even do some trills in the soprano choral sections, and it just enlivens the whole piece. So I'm glad you liked it. You should listen to the whole thing on YouTube. It's really fine. And it doesn't take that long because they go so quick through most of it. Now, I mentioned a little earlier that Messiah is actually a very atypical oratorio. And let me tell you first of all what a more typical oratorio would be. The first thing you have to realize is that an oratorio developed in Italy during Lent, when it was kind of thought to be irreverent to do opera during that time. So they developed the oratorio to have kind of dramatic music happening, but keep it penitential. So what would happen is they would pick a Bible story, typically from the Old Testament and on a penitential theme, and someone would write a new libretto telling that story, and then it would be told throughout with orchestra, and the soloists would be specific characters from that story. So for example, Handel wrote an oratorio setting of Esther, the Old Testament story. The soprano soloist is titled Esther. That's her name. That's how it is in the score. The bass might be Naaman, the evil king, right? And so it's more similar to an opera in that way. What makes Handel's Messiah atypical is that it does none of those things, right? It's a very unusual one, even though if I had my back up against a wall and had to name an oratorio, this would probably be the one. But it's very unusual. How so? Well, the texts are completely biblical, right? Jennings compiled these from Scripture, from the King James Bible and the Book of Common Prayer. He didn't write a new story telling about Messiah. The soloists do not portray characters, which is kind of interesting if you think about it. You're writing a piece about Jesus. Maybe you do kind of what the Passion genre does and say, okay, the bass soloist is going to be Jesus, and the tenor soloist is going to be an evangelist, and the soprano soloist is going to be Mary, or whatever. There's none of it. The soloists are not playing characters at all. They just are singing, right? And there's no real plot. It's not telling the story really from beginning to end necessarily. What Jennings did is something we call type anti-type philosophy, right? So he juxtaposes the Old Testament prophecy with the partnered or the anti-type, the fulfillment in the New Testament of the prophecy. It's ingenious, right? And I think a lot of the reason that this piece is so successful is for this reason. The use of Scripture, how it tells the story in a very unique way. But just know it's a very atypical oratorio. And if you ever want to listen to a typical one, listen to that Esther by Handel. And it's beautiful, but a very different kind of dramatic narrative. Now, during Handel's lifetime, Messiah did fairly well, although his oratorio Saul was initially a little bit more successful. Now, part of this is because of this atypical style. So in Dublin, it was successful right away, and the audiences embraced it. The audiences in London, it was maybe a little bit more lukewarm. And that is because they found it maybe uncouth to be quoting Scripture in a public theater. They thought that wasn't reverent enough. So they were just like, what is this oratorio? It's so different than what we're used to in these kind of more narrative oratorios that are using newly composed libretti versus quoting the Bible. But eventually, London embraced Messiah too. Now, Messiah was not a blockbuster in Handel's lifetime, and it really wasn't until the 20th century, or the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when it really became part of that standard repertoire that it is today. That's in large part due to amateur choral societies. Things like the Birmingham Festival in England, or in the United States, we talked about the Handel-Haydn Society in Boston, the Augustana group. Groups like that, these community oratorio societies, really loved Messiah and then began to perform it every year. And that's when it really became cemented. Again, so this demonstrates my previous point about the way we know pieces today isn't necessarily how they were thought of at the time. So Messiah was successful, but wasn't Handel's biggest seller during his lifetime. So one thing I do want to note here is that recently there have been some accusations of anti-Semitism in Messiah. You can read this book here by the renowned musicologist Michael Morrison. This book is really interesting, and the accusations really focus on Jennings, not on Handel, although he makes some statements about that. But what his argument is basically that that Jennings changed some of the words in the King James Bible and in the Book of Common Prayer when he put them into the libretto, that then implicated the Jews and made them seem responsible for the death of Christ. It's a really interesting book. It's supported by a lot of primary sources, and he goes kind of line by line through the libretto and helps us understand some of these accusations and some of the nuances that Jennings was kind of implying that people at the time would have been familiar with that are maybe lost to us today. Now, Morrison is very clear that he's not saying that we should not perform this piece anymore. He loves this piece and wants to see it performed. I think his goal with this book is to just help us understand it in a different way. And so if you're interested in reading it, I really recommend it to you. But no, it does maybe change your perception of the piece. So I put this quote here. If you really don't want to understand it, you simply want to enjoy it, don't read this book, right? But if you do want to go to that deeper level, I would invite you to read this book. It's very interesting. And again, don't worry, he's not trying to say that we shouldn't do this piece anymore. If you are interested in learning any more about Messiah, there's so many great sources out there, and I just picked 3 here. I've already talked about the Morrison and the Rilling book. The other one here is the Dennis Schrock, Handel's Messiah, a performance practice handbook. This really gets into the nuts and bolts of every movement by movement, how fast it should be, things to think about, dynamics, phrasing, lots of interesting things here. Again, you don't have to read it cover to cover, but if you are performing this piece, I'd recommend looking at it and going through. And if you're looking at All We Like Sheep, read the 3 or 4 pages Schrock has on that. And actually, that's the same way that Rilling organized his book as well. So now, before we get on, I've been checking the chat, and I think I'm all caught up with questions, except one here. It says, we noticed that And the Glory of the Lord was conducted in 1. And so Nancy is asking, is it easier to perform this in 1 with a smaller ensemble? It probably is than a larger group, but I think, a larger group could definitely do it if they practice it that way. And that's how I like to conduct it, except I do conduct the hemiolas too, so sometimes I jump to that. Okay, for the second part of our presentation tonight, I'm really honored to welcome Michelle Areziga to CMSU. As I mentioned, Michelle is an accomplished soprano soloist, not only with CMS, but across the United States and across the globe every year performing. And she's a great friend of CMS. I'm really honored to welcome her tonight to CMSU. So please give her a warm CMS University welcome. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi, Maestro Hughes. Nice to see you again.
It's nice
Hello,
to see you.
Hello, CMS friends and family. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us tonight. We're glad to have you here, and I'm a floating head, but I hope people will accept my apologies for technology. This is what we're working with, but everyone wants to see you, Michelle, and not me. So I want to just start by talking about this piece. I know we were talking before that you've performed as a soloist this piece 60 times, which is
maybe more, but yeah,
maybe more,
at least
right?
60
so
times, yeah.
That's amazing. Do you have a favorite movement or moment that you listen for in this piece?
I do. My favorite aria, which is actually often cut, is If God Be For Us. right at the end. Usually people are kind of tired. I just love what it states. I love the text, and I particularly love it when it's performed with a single violin as a soloist. I feel that lends to its intimacy and just a complete change of texture before the big "Worthy is the Lamb." "Worthy is the Lamb" is another very special moment for me too. That was my father's ultimate moment in the Messiah, which happened to be his jam. He used to listen to it all the time. And I will often, like on closing night, I will be the one on stage crying whenever the chorus sings that. The arias that are excerpted the most often, like the first part of my career, it was "Rejoice Greatly." I used to sing that very regularly, and I used to submit it in competitions and things like that because it shows a lot with the flexibility and the speed and the tessitura. And I used to have to really rely on my technique to make it through "I Know That My Redeemer Liveth." And now in my second half of my career, the one that I gravitate towards more to choose to excerpt is "I Know That My Redeemer Liveth," particularly because I know that audience members will often come and share their stories about remembering their own mothers or grandmothers singing that song, and what a statement of faith, and how important it was to them, and often with tears in their eyes. And so it has a lot of meaning for me. Mm-hmm.
So when you come back to a piece like you do, probably every year you're doing a Messiah somewhere, how do you prepare for that, right? Because it's got to be a little different than, I've never sung whatever piece, and so I'm going to sit down and pound out the notes and learn it and interpret it, versus this, which, you've done repeatedly. How do you get back into that frame of mind, but also kind of keep it fresh at the same time?
That's great. Each Messiah season, I will make sure that I go back to the score and make sure that I can give a very clean, accurate reading all the way through. I will practice the arias at different tempos because I know it can vary. And I want to
That's
come
so
in.
diplomatic.
I know. I want to come in to the job, to that first rehearsal with the conductor. If I've worked with the conductor before, then I know what to expect. But I want to come in with being a blank slate, being easy to work with. I will have some specific ideas about ornamentation. That's the one thing that can change from year to year. It keeps it fresh in my mind. Like, ooh, this year maybe I'll try this, or
how much do you practice those ornaments? I mean, do you kind of have a rough idea, or do you practice them? I'm going to do it exactly this way, or can you talk about choosing ornamentation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have found for myself that it is best to plan out the most extreme virtuosic, like the biggest version of an ornament. I will practice that. And that way, if in the moment I'm not feeling it, I can do less. But it is wise to have something that you can show the conductor without taking up a lot of rehearsal time, because not every conductor will have a soloist rehearsal with you. You can just be in, and the whole orchestra sitting there. You don't want to have to be teaching ornaments during the orchestra's time. But I think it's a very safe plan to have things pretty planned out. And I will say that there are some conductors who will dictate the ornamentation to me, like they'll say, we're going to do exactly what's in the Watkins Shaw.
Okay. Yeah.
So
that's probably what they're used to and have practiced. And yeah. Interesting. Do you have a preference?
Of
what? Of how much freedom to have, or do you like, because sometimes it's nice to kind of know what to do, but sometimes it's nice to just do your own thing.
I don't know. I kind of like to be somewhere in the middle. Diplomacy
exactly.
reigns. Yeah. Because it is easier for them to take things. When I say them, it is easier for a conductor to suggest taking things away than it is to say, can you zhuzh it up a little bit more?
Right.
So, you can try things and then they'll give you their own idea. Like I had one conductor in Virginia who said, every time we come back to that repeat of the initial theme, that initial melodic tune, I don't want you to ornament that even on subsequent repetitions of it, because I want the audience, I want the listener to be able to anchor themselves to here we are again at that first motif. So I thought that was interesting. And not everybody has to do it that way, but it made sense. I'm pretty agreeable.
I like it. So we talked a little bit about Messiah kind of being an atypical oratorio, right? Like it's not telling a story the way Esther might. What's it like then to try and get into, being the soprano soloist when there isn't a character that you can kind of embrace in your preparation?
That's a great question. And it doesn't bother me in the least. I never really thought about it. If anything, it allows me to be more of a commentator from my own personal point of view. When I'm singing "Come Unto Him," I can really feel like I'm trying to speak directly. It's a monologue to the audience and to the people. Just the messages of the hope, and the soprano gets all the hopeful bits.
Right.
So I actually really like it. I like it a lot. I think it's liberating and gives me more choices. There is that one movement, that chorus, though, that the chorus does play a character, don't they? Do you remember? He trusted in God.
Oh, yeah.
Because I didn't realize it. And I remember the first performance that I heard, it was actually John Nelson conducting, and he had the chorus be like vulgar, like aggressive. And
it's like a turba chorus from St. John or something, right? Like they're mocking. Yeah.
Mocking, yes. And that was very powerful. And so that's the one character kind of, yeah.
So, I mean, you've done, 60 plus Messiahs. How much variation is there when you're doing 2 or 3, 4 a year? You've seen a lot of different ways to do it. What else is out there?
Yeah, I did. I made a little checklist of some of the things that I could remember. Obviously there's a great, you also asked about how we prepare. You have to know what the cuts are.
Oh yeah. Right.
So you need to know that ahead of time. You need to know who is singing what, which things are omitted. And then you need to sit there and kind of have that list in your book during the performance to follow along a little bit. But I'm
sorry, can I just stop you just real quick?
Yeah.
You brought up following along. What's it like to sit up there for 2 hours? And, and obviously you're getting up to sing, but sometimes you're sitting for stretches, How do you stay mentally engaged and vocally warm, while you're sitting there?
Well, I am a chorister at heart. I began as a chorister. I literally know every soprano note of the entire Messiah, cover to cover, all the choruses. And so I will hum along, particularly if it's a do-it-yourself Messiah, because the audience is busy singing. And so they don't hear me singing along too. And it kind of lends to the spirit of we're all singing together. But I'm sort of used to it, sitting there. I do remember as a little girl, all my friends were being taken annually to see the Nutcracker. And I had never seen the Nutcracker. I didn't see the Nutcracker till I was in my mid-20s. But my parents took me every year to see Handel's Messiah in Chicago. And it was a big deal. We would get dressed up and I just loved it. And I didn't know if I was a soprano or an alto, but I do remember sitting a very long time as a little girl waiting to see when that girl was going to stand up and sing, right? And then she would stand up and sing, like, to me, the prettiest music after that pifa. And it is a long sit.
yeah, exactly. Just kind of,
yeah. But back to the variants. I have sung the triplet version of the Rejoice Greatly in two different concert settings. I've sung the entire He Shall Feed His Flock with no alto. Um, I like when I get to sing the "He is cut off." Recitative, snag that from the tenor, and then also the "But thou didst not leave thy soul in hell." And then I told you last night the story. There was a performance in Michigan that I showed up to, and at the rehearsal there was a little bit of chit chat, and I didn't know what was going on. And they said, "Unfortunately, we have received the wrong orchestral parts for Thou Art Gone Up on High, and we have the soprano key. And would you be willing?" And I said, yes. And I went to the practice room and I came back 20 minutes later and sight read it basically. And then I did it in performance. And that was really, really fun. That's a great aria. It's often cut. And if not, then it's usually the alto. Mm-hmm. So that was super fun. Also, there have been some performances where the soloists were asked to stand in for parts of the chorus. For example, "Since by man came death," that was by soloist. "Since by man came death," and then the entire chorus, "By man came also." So that was kind of cool, just to use the soloists as a texture change. Of course, we generally sing along with the Amen and the Hallelujah chorus and things like that. But lots of variations like that, lots of tempo variations, like especially in the Redeemer Liveth, that can be sung as a 7-minute aria or as a 4-minute aria. I'm not even kidding. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can do it.
Yeah, it can be very slow. So your job then is to just show up and be flexible and do it however it's being done.
Yes, and to be committed to the vision, and not to be like, oh, I have to, I did like that clip you were playing though, how the tenor got to sit down after the recits and then the other tenor got up and did the fast aria. Like, I haven't gotten to do that, but yeah.
That'd be nice, right?
It would be nice. Some conductors do a pretty quick Rejoice Greatly. Maybe I could let that go to a colleague or something.
Right. Well, I was saying last night, every tenor wants to sing Comfort Ye, but doesn't want to do every valley, right? Because it's so much harder, right?
For sure.
I'm going to bring in a few questions here. I have one from Rick that says, Michelle, would you ever want to conduct a performance, or is it more fun to sing it?
Oh, it's more fun to sing it. I mean, that sounds like an interesting question. I feel like I should just play along and go, sure, I'd like to conduct it. But I suppose if something were to happen at the last minute, I would give it a shot.
Sure, you know the piece.
I know the piece.
Who is that? There is a conductor, Barbara Hannigan, right?
Yes, she's amazing.
She's amazing.
The legatee, yes, I know. But I don't have...
She turns around and then turns back.
I know. But we can't wear outfits like that to conduct
the
Messiah.
Yeah. If you don't know Barbara Hannigan, she's amazing. And she can do both. I mean, she's a rock star. Here's another one for you, Michelle. Do you like singing with small or large group better? You
mean as a soloist or as a chorister?
I think as a soloist or both, yeah.
That's not fair. I like them, diplomacy. I like them all. I will say that it is interesting to hear it done with a smaller ensemble. Mm-hmm. If it's done well, it can be very, very exciting. It can be usually cleaner and a little bit more brisk, especially if it's, with the period instruments. Like the theorbo. Someone was asking what the giant guitar lute was. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it does. It's leaner.
It is leaner.
You do lose some of the power on the
that
Worthy
is
as
true.
the Lamb or those big moments, so there's pros and cons.
That is true. That is true. The perfect size ensemble is the Chicago Master Singers.
I thought you were going to say the one that's paying, Yeah. I'll say that one of my favorite moments of Messiah is always at the end in the Amen, you get through this big fugue, and then there's this amen, amen, and then there's a measure of rest. And at Augustana, you could always hear the organ pipes before the final cadence. And it is just this sense of relief and joy. And I always listen for that. Hallelujah Chorus is great, but there's all these other great moments in Messiah.
But that hall at Augustana, I mean, just that gigantic, wide,
Yes.
that's a special place for sure.
Diplomacy. Yes.
No, I don't mind it. I thought it was great. I think it's a really great place. I love when you're on stage and the way you can see the people in the audience, you can see the community, that you can see the families. And it's a very family and diverse audience out there too. I do love the audiences that come for the Messiah. I've been the soloist for the International Music Foundation Do-It-Yourself Messiah in Chicago at the Harris Theater for 8 years now and counting. And I love how you have people who are there singing their faith. I mean, like hands up, professing, praising, worshiping. And then you've got people with like elf hats on and blinking antlers cheersing their cocktails. And it's both a holiday fun social tradition, and it's also an act of worship and a sacred event. I really love that because that just integrates even the parts of myself that love the Messiah so much. I have two stories about my son.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, when he was in second grade, he made me this little bracelet and he asked me to wear it in my performance, and it was the Messiah. And I actually brought him along to the Messiah because I wanted him to be able to sit at Orchestra Hall. This is with the Apollo Chorus. And he sat next to my voice teacher, and I told him, I said, one day when you're a grown up and you have your own family, your own wife, your own special girl, you're going to bring her to sit in this very important special hall. And I just want you to remember sitting here and looking at your mom. I said, and every time I think of you, I'm going to turn my little bracelet. I have that favorite memory. Here's another memory. He used to, because he's been hearing me practice this every year for his whole life. He, for a long time, thought the words for rejoice were rejoice quickly.
I like
rejoice quickly, O daughter of Zion. Yeah.
Not a bad strategy in terms of tempo. I like
right.
That. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight, Michelle. It's been an honor to get to know you, and I'll give a plug at the end here, but please come to the CMS Virtual Gala this Saturday evening. You'll hear Michelle and Ludmilla doing some amazing music with tie-ins to CMSU. So please tune in for that. And of course, an upcoming concert with CMS, hopefully soon, will certainly feature Michelle. So thank you very much for being here.
It would be a privilege. Thank you. Thank you all. You guys are the best.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining me this evening and throughout this season as we have continued to grow together, both musically and as a community through CMS University. I want to take just a few minutes and say some special thank yous. First of all, to the entire CMS board. I pitched them this idea in June, and they've been nothing but supportive the whole time. In particular, I'd like to thank the president, Sue Umdenstock, who has reviewed each of these slides in advance of the weeks, make sure I don't have any typos in there, and has offered really wonderful advice, as well as Karen Commons, who has done the same and offered great ideas about flow, organization, and pacing, and I'm grateful to both of you very much. I want to say a very, very, very special thank you to Alan Metzger. He's been CMS's tech wizard throughout this year, and his help with CMS University and the virtual choirs has really been invaluable, and it's made my job possible. He's been a great companion through this process as I've said, can we do a test live stream? Why did this not work last night? All these things. He was always a phone call, a text, a FaceTime, an email away. And so I'm very indebted to you, Alan, and thank you very much. CMS is currently making plans for next season. We don't know exactly what it'll look like yet because things are changing every day, but we are so grateful for these vaccines, and it's looking very promising that we will be able to safely get back to doing what we love, which is singing together and sharing our music with audiences. So I can't give you any more information about it tonight, but I invite you to keep on our website, chicagomastersingers.org, our Facebook page, this YouTube channel. I'll pop by this summer and make a video announcement, but please stay in touch with CMS. I'm really looking forward to seeing all you singers at a rehearsal soon. And if you're not in CMS, I hope you'll join us for a concert as soon as possible. I do want to plug here this upcoming virtual gala that I mentioned earlier, which is coming up on Saturday evening. You can see this banner here. As we're really wrapping up this pandemic, fingers crossed, we have to remember that CMS University and everything else that we've been doing is only made possible through the funds we raise during our annual gala, which happens every spring. Last year, we were fortunate that even at the very beginning of this pandemic, when we weren't able to get together, we had a very successful gala that raised over $50,000 for CMS, and that has kept us afloat this year. And even better, we didn't have to get dressed up or venture out. So here's some things I want to remind you about, things that you can do to support CMS's future. There are only just a few days left to register for this year's gala, which is coming up on Saturday evening, as you'll see. Remember, you don't have to get dressed up. You can just enjoy from the comfort of your couch with your favorite beverage in hand, all from the comfort of your own home. It is a free event, and it's completely online. You don't have to pay anything to register. It includes a silent auction, the premiere of our latest virtual choir production, and a special musical performance by Michelle and Ludmilla. I was actually very fortunate to attend the recording session of this last week, and it was amazing. It was the first live singing I've heard in over a year. I was so pleased to hear it, and I can't wait for you to hear it too. So the funds raised at this benefit will help offset our operating costs as well as our continuing community activities like CMS University. Now, last year, despite the pandemic, we had over 200 people participate in the gala, and 50% of the attendees made a direct donation to CMS. Our silent auction drew just about a third of those participants. So that means that you will have an excellent chance at getting a great deal on some fantastic items, all the while you'll be supporting CMS. Please register. You can do so by, after you leave the live stream, you can go to our website, chicagomastersingers.org, look for this beautiful green banner and click on it, and then you'll be taken to a registration page. You don't want to miss out on all the music, fun, the silent auction, and of course, the opportunity to support CMS. Again, just go to chicagomastersingers.org and click on this banner. I'll look forward to seeing you there on Saturday evening. I'm sure it is going to be a wonderful, wonderful evening. Our moment of Zen tonight, our final moment of Zen, is a kind of my parting gift to you as we say goodbye for the season, and that is a wonderful piece by John Rutter called Gaelic Blessing. You'll notice that it isn't the famous Irish blessing. It's a little different, but I think it's equally beautiful and something that only John Rutter could set so nicely. One last thing about this is that one final housekeeping thing. Remember, you can watch any previous session of CMS University on our YouTube channel if you ever missed one. And there's also a playlist on there of all the moments of Zen. So if you are ever missing CMSU, you could go back and listen to some beautiful music that we've listened to together this year. All right, our final moment of Zen, John Rutter's A Gaelic Blessing. So here I am as acting dean of CMS University in my official academic regalia to offer you all the rights, privileges, and responsibilities that come with a CMS University education, which, just to be clear, are exactly zero. But I hope that you've enjoyed this, that you've learned a little something, got to listen to some beautiful music. I know I've gotten to know each of you a little bit, and I've been grateful for that. And I'm wishing you nothing but the very best in the coming months, and I hope to see you soon in person at a rehearsal or concert. Until then, thanks for joining me on this journey. I hope you take good care and have a good evening.